window. And the third image is someone that actually
Yeah, thanks, James. That invoicing is really, really important. Money does make the world go round. So this work that I'm going to share with you for the next 20 minutes, right, James? 18 minutes to be precise, is a combination of my corporate experience and also the world's longest PhD. I began this. I was a student together with Ava Lovelace, and I've been looking at the rather messy intersection between software and law. And so I've looked at things like privacy, for instance, but I've done quite a bit of empirical work looking at accessibility and disability law and how it works and doesn't work with software. And for a number of years, I ran product management at SAP for part of the human resource management products. So I understand a little bit about HR software, and particularly about how we seek and find employment. If you think back to 20 years ago, you would look for a job probably in the newspaper. Today, something like well over 90% of jobs are found via the internet channels, be these job portals or be they company job sites. And if you look at accessibility today, there's a lot of law. There's some names on my T-shirt of people that have been really important and fundamental in driving accessibility forward, but there isn't a lack of accessibility law. Some of it is poorly implemented, poorly designed, with limited compliance around that law, but there's a massive law about accessibility. If you catch me in the tea break, I can bore you to death with things like what's so great about the UNCPRD, what's not so great about the UK Accessibility Act, what's going on in Germany and so on, but there's a bunch of law. There's also a bunch of regulations and standards from an IT perspective as well. Some of you will be familiar with things like WCAG, etc. Okay. So what I was interested in doing was looking at the state of job boards. I was born in England. I try not to tell too many people that. I grew up in South Africa. You can probably guess from my accent, and I live in Germany. This means that I support the Germans for football, the South Africans for cricket and rugby, and the English for snooker. And if I do that, I generally do pretty well. So I looked at 10, I looked at, together with some colleagues at the university, we looked at 10 German organizations. These were a mixture of public sector and private sector, big famous corporate names. And I wanted to particularly look at how their job boards stacked up from an accessibility perspective. And we did this in a couple of ways. We did some automated testing using automated testing tools. But the main part of the exercise was actually with people, with 4 students at the university who were either blind or had severe visual impairment. And and so first up I did the automated testing, and they all the organizations, with the exception of one, failed pretty dismally on the automated testing. We happened to use a tool called A-Checker, which is a relatively common tool, but you use a variety of tools. All of the sites, all of these famous German multinational companies and public sector organizations failed pretty abominably, dismally on the basic accessibility tests. I should have perhaps told you that my presentation would be quite depressing. Many of the errors were really, really straightforward stuff that really should have been picked up. So a lot of organizations were simply not even effectively testing. So what we also did is we applied a more recent test, which is there's been a tool developed out of Switzerland. It's an open source tool that tests PDF accessibility. We felt this was really, really important because so many things are done in PDF. So it might be, for instance, things like privacy statements, or terms of conditions, or navigation information. All these things are provided in PDFs. But if the PDF itself is inaccessible, then that creates a further barrier. And there is now this very cool tool out of Switzerland called PAC3, which is really good at testing PDFs. One of the simple things we found, for instance, is that most of the PDFs would the default language was English, but the text was written in German. So when you applied that, when your screen reader hit that, the German sounded like my German, which is from an accent point of view pretty terrible. So it was totally inaccessible. So Max, Philip, and Florian were and Joshua were my volunteers, and they are students either at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, which is where I'm doing my academic work, or they're from the Fachhochschule, which is another form of university in Karlsruhe. They are either studying computer science, or one of them, Max, in fact, is a final year master's chemistry student. So this individual determination is awesome. He's medically blind, and yet he is just about to hand in his master's thesis in chemistry. So when we tested the sites, all of them required what we term cited help. So there was either myself or another colleague in the lab sitting next to the people. We recorded all the screen interactions, but they were not able to get through a job application without the help of a cited person. Okay, and for instance, an application on one organization took max 8 hours to do. Right, to fill in a job application. Right. The public sector sites were better than the private sector sites, but they were better in terms of theoretical, technical accessibility, but in terms of usability, they were no better. In fact, they were actually worse, because they were more complicated. So it would pass better perhaps on the WCAG or the BATV test, but actually in terms of real practical accessibility, the public sector sites were no better. So to give you an example, here's an example from a German bank. It's a really cool, hip slide, right? So here you can choose career opportunities, Ausbildung, which is in Germany you can do a lot of really cool stuff, company and university together. One of the things that the British should learn about is some of these methods in Germany are really great. So school kids, practical, and so on, all these different opportunities. But none of these images had alternative text behind them. So this was totally impenetrable to anybody with a visual impairment. Again, a simple test would have picked that up. This is a PDF from one of Germany's leading companies. And when you run this PDF through the checker, through the screen reader, it doesn't read out here's away for a couple of days. It reads out HE space IS, and you weren't able to escape out of this form. So if you wanted to read that form, you were entirely lost. Another example. This screen with a student that was visually impaired, he loved this screen, right? Because it was black and white. It was really easy. It was really easy to fill in. The blind students found this screen an absolute nightmare, right? Because the tab order was totally ludicrous, right? As you can see, like first name and second name, every other screen in the world, they will be in a single row. And this one, they happen to be right to left, and also there were no meta descriptors behind these fields, so you kind of had to guess what you were filling in. Another organization, this was the screen, which the blind people loved, okay, because you had there was no field. Then fill it in, no descriptor, then fill it in. It was all just in one field, really easy to fill it in. But the visually impaired student, he basically threw the mouse across the room when he saw the screen. Okay. Some of the other challenges is there was a massive amount of unnecessary complexity, right? So this is a pull-down menu for, I saw somebody, there was a poor person who was a Frankfurt supporter in the room. He had a Frankfurt Eintracht. Sorry for you guys, you know. They did win the German equivalent of the FA Cup last year, but that's the last thing they win for at least the next 30 years, so enjoy that moment. This is another one where massively complex pull-down, right? Without good search criteria on this. 300 item pull-down menu, right? A person with good eyesight, for instance, could just scan that, but to have all of those things read out for you, Another one here, description of what your degree is in. Again, no search criteria. And then the most frustrating one of all is the calendar block. So you don't need to follow what's going on here, but he's going through filling the screen, listening to the screen reader, right? And then it gets stuck on the date. So without a mouse, you can't get past the date, the fancy, cool-looking date screen. Another example of while it's accessible, from a usability point of view, it's just downright weird. Okay, the Germans got rid of the royal family nonsense that you people have here. Okay, but still, in this particular public sector organization, you could fill in whether you were a baron, whether you were an earl, or whether you were another type of royal family member. And again, as a sighted person, you simply tab over that and say, why nonsense, why they're asking for that. But a person with from a visibility point of view was struck by having to page through that. So just summarizing these, generally pretty bloody dismal, right? Okay, right. And the situation in the UK, the situation in the US is not significantly different to this. I think the UK public sector has probably done more than some other public sectors have done, but generally this is a common situation from an employment perspective. There were some good points. This was from a German retailer, online retailer, and they had a really, really excellent search. It was really, really easy to use, really powerful, no complicated pull downs, really, really easy to get around the site. It was the only site that really passed the got close to passing all the WCAG requirements. The only failure on this site was that it didn't work with Explorer. So on Explorer, one button was missing. So they couldn't save the transaction on Explorer. It worked in Chrome, it worked on all other things. Now, for the rest of us, that's not a problem. Right, we just switch to a different browser. We're a bit irritated, we toggle over to another browser. But if your assistive control technology only works with Explorer, then you're up a creek without a paddle, right? Some of those sites, especially the public sector ones, were good with providing information. In Germany, there is a lot of public sector support for people with disability. So, there were cases when public sector sites where they were much better at helping you. But the summary from Max, sorry, this is Joshua, I thought was the best one. So that the point there he said at the end, he said, this doesn't work. Without help, it is impossible, okay? And with help, it's not fun and frustrating. So perhaps to get a little bit more positive, let's think for a moment, building on some of the stuff we've heard already today, how do we fix the problem, right? And fixing this problem is going to require multiple efforts. It's not simply that we blame the software developer who built these screens, but part of it needs to be the knowledge and the attitude of the software developers themselves. At the end of the day, somebody decided I couldn't give a shit and didn't run the accessibility tests. Somebody somewhere decided not to run those tests, right? At the same time, We mentioned this earlier. We saw the talk of inclusive design. I think this is fundamental. We need to learn from architecture, from building architecture. If you come into this building, it's an awesome piece from an accessibility point of view. We need to bring and update trendy software trends like design thinking and bring inclusivity into those. We also need to include more inclusive hiring in the software development industry yourself. If we had more software developers and programmers and so on that themselves were people with people with disabilities, we would build more inclusive. We would build more inclusive software. We have a lot of work to do in terms of the development tools and the methodologies and the software standards themselves. There are many problems with WCAG as a standard. There are still lots of things we could do to make it better. And I think also the tools that we have as software developers need to improve. Methodologies as well. For instance, in Agile, we should have an accessibility test as part of every build. Right? When you ship that screen, when you ship that build at the end of your week or your 2-week cycle, the accessibility test should be an automated part of that test, and the accessibility issues should automatically go into your backlog. Okay? Accessibility shouldn't be something you test in a waterfall method at the end of your development, but it's something you do all along. I'm really, really impressed with what Microsoft have done in terms of building more accessibility by default into some of their tooling. I think what Microsoft have done in the last 3 or 4 years is so much better than other software companies are doing, and we can all learn from that, but I think there's still much more to be done. Buyer behavior. Money makes the world go round. As buyers of software, organizations need to be much more critical on the topics of accessibility. There is a thing called a VPAT, which is essentially a voluntary statement of accessibility that software vendors do. But these are generally quite feeble and not accessibility is not really aggressively assessed in the software purchase point of view. And more positively, we saw today many mentions of positive externalities for accessibility, where technology can fundamentally improve accessibility. I think of Soundscape from Microsoft, an example. But perhaps as a final point, one of the students mentioned to me how helpful he found in Facebook. There's quite a lot of automated description of photos. And as a blind person, he found this really cool. He actually mentioned to somebody else, "Hey, I saw you got a new cat." And that was because the Facebook AI technology recognized that as a cat and placed that into the alternative text. So there's so much that I think we can do with technology if we put our minds to it to improve accessibility. And finally, very, very finally, because I'm probably over time now, is that it is high time that the regulators focused on improving accessibility, the clarity of accessibility legislation itself, and also being more serious about sanction. So whereas in the UK there are some problems with the law, the real problem is in the UK is that there's been very little actual sanction with regards to accessibility failure. So fixing the problem, I think, will require multiple parties to come to the table. But anyway, everyone else has like cool pictures of their kids, and as my surname is Otter, I figured I would inflict some cool pictures of otters on you, off you instead. So thanks very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you over the rest of the conference. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Yeah, the snooker. It's like when you wake up in the morning,